On today's Locked On Jayhawks, Kansas absolutely eviscerated, embarrassed by BYU. We get into the game. What it means is Kansas in danger of losing out on their NCAA tournament streak. We'll discuss all that on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode. Thank you wherever you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. Kansas demoralized. I mean, pick a word that you want to talk about, and it would probably apply for this one. There's probably some very colorful language that I'm not going to use on the podcast today that, would probably be pretty fitting for how things went here. And if you're watching on YouTube, I think our graphic about sums it up. So Kansas loses big to BYU. And I could get into the individual stats. I could get into the fact that BYU shot bonkers from three, or I don't know. I say bonkers like they're a good 3-point shooting team and Kansas left them open and stuff. I could get into the idea that Kansas continues to not be able to get to the free throw line, and that Kansas just doesn't have the shooting to consistently space the floor, hit threes at a consistent level. I could get into the idea that we talked about before the game. One of the keys to the game was not turning the ball over, and they continue to have trouble turning the ball over when they're on the road, and they did it again against a BYU team that's not particularly great at forcing turnovers. And I guess I have been kind of talking about these things, and I could talk about the individual performances, which we will a little bit along the way here, about players who struggled, and some of that will get intertwined in kind of the big picture stuff. But I think when you lose a game like this, where you lose by as many points as you do to BYU, where you're never in the game, where you get just absolutely destroyed right after you lose a bad game at Utah, and right after everything is being questioned, right after there's rumors coming around from, Mike Vernon talking about some blow-ups in the locker room, so to speak, like wherever, after all of this happens, this is not just a game that I'm going to break down what happened in the game. And I don't even know if we're going to get to our game awards. We are going to get to the NCAA tournament discussion and what's next and everything. But this is just kind of a big picture thing. Like, this has to be a big picture conversation. And so talking about that, this is just kind of an absolutely stinky team. This is a team that, yes, like, you can continue to look back if you want and be like, oh, they beat Duke, so like I still believe in the potential. That was a completely different team than they are now. That team ain't coming back. That team is dead. That team is dead. What's that Taylor Swift song where she's like, I'm dead, or she's dead, or that's this Kansas team. And if there was any question about this team showing any fight after all of those things would happen, you got a resounding answer to that. The answer was nope, because Kansas lost 91-57. That is a 34-point loss. That ties the biggest loss of the Bill Self era. At one point of the game, Gary Bedore tweeted out that they were in danger of losing their biggest game in program history, which was like 40 points to Nebraska, 1,900. I don't know, was that game 40-0? It would not shock me if that was the case. So anyway, you lose by 34. That ties the USC loss in the NCAA tournament. And I tweeted this out at D Johnson Radio that Bill Self now has 6 losses of 29 or more points at Kansas. 3 of them have come in the last 2 seasons since the calendar year of 2024. 4 of them have come since 2021 when you include that USC loss. This is a bad trend. You have now lost 14 of 50. Okay, let me rephrase that. Bill Self has lost 59 games at Kansas by double digits. So even by 10, which sometimes that's not even a blowout. The game just, balloons there with late free throws and stuff. But 24% of those losses have come over the last 3 seasons, including this one. So this one and the 2 previous, right? So a quarter of them have come in the last 3 seasons when he's been at Kansas coaching for over 20 seasons, right? I think this is what, 21, year 21 for Bill Self. He's had 41 losses by 13 or more points. 13 of those have come over the last 3 seasons, which would be, almost a third of those. And here's the big one. Bill Self has had 15 or now 16 losses by 20 or more points in his time at Kansas. Of those 15 losses by 20 or more points, or 16 losses by 20 or more points, 7 of the 16 losses by 20 or more points for Bill Self in his entire time at Kansas have come in the last 3 seasons, this year and the 2 previous years. So, whether you want to talk about the program slipping or this is just this core of players that they've just had a really bad run evaluating talent for a couple of years, right? I mean, you're not going to hit every year, and maybe all those years where you did hit in a high degree, like you were due for a couple of years of this being bad, I don't know. But this is the worst team in the Bill Self era. I do know that. I do know that. I was pushing back on it, at times throughout the season. I thought they were better than last year because you had the injuries, because you had more depth. On this year's team, it doesn't matter. This is the worst team of the Bill Self era, and it's not even close. And they have kind of quit on the season. And the craziest part of this, too, is Bill Self at the beginning of this game went with the absolutely wonky starting lineup, and we've seen the lineup before, but the wonky starting lineup, you have Dajuan Harris, Zeke Mayo at the 1 and 2, and then you go with the 3 big lineup, because when you're a team that can't shoot and you're playing a team who can shoot and is going to space you out, the best thing to do is play 3 big men. So they play KJ Adams at the 3, they play Flory Badunga at the 5, and Hunter Dickinson, Flory at the 4 and Hunter at the 5. And, that wasn't the lineup all game and everything like that, but the crazy thing to me is the intention of that starting lineup, at least how I read it, was Bill Self saying, screw this. If we're not going to be very good, I'm going to go out the way I want to go out. I want to go out swinging, and these are the guys that I feel like I can get into the foxhole with. These are the guys that, we might not be able to make this pretty. Our offense might not be very good, but these are the guys that I think are going to try for me and are going to put, the front of the jersey out there and are going to give me the effort that I need, that we can just try to ugly up some of these games, right? I'm fine losing 63-58, or I'm fine trying to eke out some of these wins in an ugly way if that's what it takes. And that felt like the intention to me for what Bill Self was doing by starting that starting lineup. But then you go out and you lose by 34. And in a game where you start that starting lineup, where the idea, again, is to play with more energy and, aggressiveness and have more of Bill Self's trust, you get off to a horrible start. You're not checking shooters in the corners who are like elite 3-point shooters. You get down 8-0. You get down 22-7. You still look like you're lethargic. You still look like you're making mental lapses. You still are having bad turnovers. It didn't matter. And obviously tonight was more than just not caring. Like, you don't lose by 34 points by not caring. I mean, that's a big part of it, right? But obviously, you have a team that's a bad fit playing together. You had bad execution. It was mental breakdowns. It was playing bad. And quite honestly, just being a bad basketball team right now that is playing an outdated style of basketball. You don't get to the free throw line. You don't shoot threes. You don't shoot them well. You shoot a lot of mid-range. And it's an outdated style of basketball right now. You play 2-3 big basketball. I think it's safe to say they're just not a good team through the month of February. And one that if the season started, today, if you were to redo the college basketball season, I don't think this team would end up being an NCAA tournament team. I think they had some good stuff going for them at the beginning of the season that has not carried over at all. And in fact, in a way, like the locker room, players not getting along, whatever it is, has fallen apart. And so like I said earlier, like the team that beat Duke, this is not the same team at all, obviously. Fortunately, they did build that nest egg early in the season by, beating Duke and beating Michigan State, and all that stuff does count. And the NCAA tournament committee got rid of on the team sheets the last 10 games, which could be very helpful to Kansas. And so, going back to the question that I kind of talked about at the beginning here, does this mean Kansas is, no longer a guarantee for the NCAA tournament? I do think that is a real question. Like, if, the way they're playing, you don't feel like they're guaranteed to win any more games. And if they don't win any more games, I don't think they're going to make the NCAA tournament, right? At that point in time, you'd be sitting there because you have 5 games in Big 12 play remaining, right? And then you'd have at least one Big 12 tournament game, right? So you're sitting at 17-9 after the BYU loss. Let's say, again, in that hypothetical where you go 0-6 down the stretch, you'd be 17-15. I don't think that gets you in the NCAA tournament. What's the likelihood you lose every game? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, if you're playing where you're just quitting, it's hard to win games, even against lesser opponents like Oklahoma State and Colorado. It's hard to even win those games when you're just kind of quitting. So I don't know. I would still think they're going to win 1 or 2 down the stretch. And if you win 1 even, you're, at that point, you're 18-14. You win 2, you're 19-13. I do think that gets you in with those wins that you had in the non-con because you play in the Big 12. But again, it is ugly, and it's not a guarantee at this point because, you could hypothetically lose those games. So this team just kind of stinks, man. They're certainly more talented than they play, And they're certainly more talented than the record indicates, but they're not that talented. And beyond it all, they're a bad fitting team. They're just kind of a summation of Bill Self's recent whiffs in the portal, I think both overall and how he'd use them and how they fit in with the team. And it's a team who doesn't seem to get along. It's a team that doesn't seem to take joy in playing together or bring pride to that Jayhawk logo or the Kansas across the chest in front of the jersey. There's just too many holes. There's too many things working against them. There's too many questions, too much not caring. And it is more than just one thing being wrong. There's a bunch of things wrong with this team. You can't, in my opinion, just point your finger and say it's all on that guy or it's all on that thing. It's on, you need all your fingers pretty much, right? And maybe another hand to be able to do it too. And so you're left with the worst team of the Bill Self era, team that is no longer guaranteed to make the NCAA tournament, even though I still think they will make it. And I think above all, it's just a really bad team to watch and spend your time. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by TurboTax. And, honestly, after watching this game, you need an escape. Doing taxes sounds like a better time than watching that game. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed. And while you go about your day, no stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is Taxes Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, continuing on with the show here. Locked On Jayhawks, please subscribe. Thank you for joining us anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page. Kansas loses 91-57. I do want to talk a little bit more about that starting lineup here for KU, because going back to the starting lineup, the idea was to go out with the guys you trust. At least that's how I viewed it from Bill Self. I don't think he viewed that. I would hope not. I don't think he viewed that starting lineup as saying, hey, this is going to give us a strategic advantage tonight, or this is our best fitting roster. Again, if that was the case, then I have some other questions. I think this was more so just, again, him saying, hey, I don't know that I can trust these other guys. And if we're going to lose, we're going to go out losing my way. And I want to send a message to the team. And at the very least, if I have guys I can trust, like maybe I can call plays one way and maybe we can just grind up the game and find a way to win that way. But to not start the game off with any energy when you do that just makes it seem like the entire thing is lost. And I think this honestly goes back to me for like what I said in the Utah game. After the Utah game, the post game, thank you for an everydayer and already caught it. You can have one or two players. If you're playing five people at once, you can have just even one or two players who doesn't care, who's missing out on rotations, who's making mental lapses, who's making physical mistakes, who's not hustling as hard as possible. And even one or two guys doing that on the court at all times is going to make everybody look like they're playing that way. Because then it makes all of a sudden, if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, then somebody who is doing what they're supposed to be doing is like, oh crap, that guy's wide open. I'm going to go try to cover for them. And then it looks like they're scrambling when they were actually doing the right thing, And so I don't think it's necessarily every player again, but it's enough guys and it's enough players who don't seem to be having fun playing together that it does look like everybody. And maybe at this point it is seeping into everybody by just being kind of something that is going around and everything like that. But strategically, if we're talking about the starting lineup, that was a horrible matchup to do it. You're playing a team in BYU who shoots a billion threes and shoots them at a high percentage. And again, BYU knocked them down 14 of 36. Who would have thought 39% from 3-point range? Who would think that having slower footed big men would make things more difficult? It's like, I've said this before, KJ Adams is a very good defender. The one thing that KJ Adams is not a great defender on is off ball defense on good 3-point shooters. But in this game, they had him doing that. It's like you're taking away your advantages that you're having there. And then furthermore, if you're just going to go, this is what I really don't understand from the starting lineup. If you are going to say, hey, these are the guys I trust, this is going to be our starting lineup, I want to, have the guys who are tough or whatever. I mean, one, I could probably point to somebody and be like, I don't know in the starting lineup if I point to that guy as being like the epitome of hustle and of being tough, but we'll leave that alone for right now. If you are just going to go with the guys you trust and want to send a message by making that your starting five, why would you still play the other guys and keep the rotation in a mess? Because you look at the final stats here for Kansas, and I guess it does get a little bit out of sorts because you're in a blowout, and so you're throwing out even more different lineups. So it's like in a game where you thought, okay, he's going to go with this crazy starting lineup, he's going to narrow down the rotations, and he's only going to play the guys he trusts. Well, he went with that starting lineup, but Shaquille Moore played 14 minutes, AJ Storr played 18, Marquise Passmore played 12, Rylan Griffin played 14, David Coy played 14. It wasn't a narrowing of the rotation at all. And so that's what I don't get. If the thought process is just go with the guys you trust, cut the rotation to 7. I don't care. Try something, right? If it means AJ Storr gets 0 minutes, if it means this guy gets 0 minutes, you know what? At this point, try something, right? If that is the avenue you want to go with, stick to that avenue. Or if you want to go with the avenue where it's like, hey, we're going to let AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin play 30 minutes a night and just see what happens, then go with that avenue. But you can't be middling it. And that's what they're trying to do right now. And so that's why I didn't understand the starting lineup and then the continuation of that. And it's not like the AJ Storr minutes, for instance, were something special. Like Storr was bad in this game. He had 4 turnovers in 18 minutes. He was 1 for 5 from the floor. I mean, a lot of KU players were bad, right? I mean, Hunter Dickinson goes 5 of 13, so he continued on his struggles shooting the ball and just looked like he didn't want to be there at different points. He was minus 39 on the box score for KU. Nobody else was minus 30 or below. Dajuan Harris, who, I do think hustled a little bit. He had 7 assists, but it seemed like early in the game, Dajuan was like, hey, I'm going to try to be a scoring point guard, and that ain't the game. He had 2 points on 1 of 7. Like, that wasn't good. I can keep going down the line. I don't need to do this because really nobody played. I guess David Coy had a good game for KU off the bench, and it was nice to see Rylan Griffin hit a couple threes. But, like, this wasn't anything that I can point to and say these individual players. Point being, I just don't understand. Like, pick a side. Pick a side of the aisle, I guess, so to speak, on what the logic is there. And I do think I have one other kind of big picture thought, and this is something that goes back to what I think with Dajuan Harris and Hunter Dickinson struggling. It's not impossible, actually, to play 2 big basketball. Now, tonight was a different thing, right? You started 3 big basketball, which that I think is kind of impossible in today's day and age, but it's not impossible to play 2 big basketball in today's day and age. I mean, shoot, Houston is one of the best teams in the country. They play 2 bigs who can't shoot. Now, you could say that in the case of Juwan Roberts, like he can at least like take a guy off the dribble from the high post and power into him. And he has that little, runner shot that he banks in. So like it gives him at least enough offense, but neither of their big men are knocking down consistent mid-range shots or 3-point shots. The reason why they make it work is, I mean, there's a lot of reasons they make it work. One, they're, so good at getting offensive rebounds. So they take advantage of playing 2 big basketball, which KU doesn't always do. But they have scoring guards around the 2 bigs, right? Emmanuel Sharp is a flamethrower when he gets going. LJ Cryer, same thing. And Milos Uzan has fit in seamlessly for them and can score from different levels. And then they've got guys off the bench who can score from the guard positions. If you have guys who can get buckets for you at the guard positions, you can play 2 big basketball, right? In specific settings. Right? You think back to, I guess, I don't know, there have been teams recently, like whether it's North Carolina, if you want to go back to like some Roy Williams days, or if you want to go back, like, I don't know, if you want to look at the Duke team that lost to Kansas in the Elite Eight. I know they lost to a Kansas team in the Elite Eight, but like that was a 1-2 matchup that they lost in overtime. They played 2 bigs. Or I don't know. You see teams be able to do it, point being. But again, it goes back to the idea you better have scoring guards around it. And the problem is Dajuan Harris is not a scoring guard, and you saw that in this game. And so it's like, this is what I've kind of been saying all along, and a lot of people have been echoing and saying and stuff like that. It's that if you have Dajuan Harris on a team with a bunch of scores around him, it works. Unfortunately, that's not this team. If you have Hunter Dickinson with a bunch of, scoring wings who can defend, like you look at his first year at Michigan, he had Franz Wagner, who's a great all-around wing, and then I think it was Isaiah Livers, the other, who was a scoring and defense wing. You have 2-way wings. It can work with Hunter Dickinson. Kansas doesn't have that. You can make it work with KJ Adams, right? If you play him in a specific role and have the right personnel around him. Kansas doesn't have that personnel or play him in the right role. And then you combine all 3 and it doesn't work. I don't even know if it works with 2 of the 3. But the problem is you have all 3 on the same roster when you could make any one of those individual. If you just had the choice, there were 3 pathways and each pathway led to a different way and you had 1 player on each pathway. I think you could make any of the 3 pathways work. I don't think you can make it work with all three guys. And that is kind of another big picture thing that has been happening all season long, and I think you saw a little bit more of in this game. All right, what's next for KU besides feeling like a funeral? This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us on this depressing episode of Locked On Jayhawks. I will say there is a little bit of a freeing feeling of this game, at least for me. I don't know, because like it was after the Utah game, is like, yeah, this is, I think the title of the thumbnail was Rock Bottom. And I wasn't really expecting them to win this game, but if you do win this game, maybe you get your hope back up. I don't know. I think people's hope is kind of cratered at this point for this season. And so it's just like, okay, well, now you don't have to get ultra invested to where you're not like living and dying with every win and loss. But I don't know. I say that, and then you're going to get to the next game and you're going to get your hopes back up again, because that is just the nature of things. You've seen so many great memories with Kansas basketball that you're not going to remove yourself from the hope that easily. Anyway, what is next for Kansas? It's Oklahoma State on Saturday. Home game. Is there any? Okay, so I think there's, when you look at what's coming up here for Kansas, obviously the NCAA tournament streak. Is that going to continue for KU? As they laid out earlier, I think if you can win 2 games, you're for sure good there. If you win 1 game, I think you're okay. But you definitely be leaving it up a little bit for interpretation. If you lose every game, I think you're out. So I think they're going to be okay, but it's not a guarantee. So that streak, I guess, is in jeopardy for now, even if it's unlikely. But you lose this game on Saturday, then it does become like a real conversation, I think, because this is your most winnable game remaining on Saturday at home. And then the other streak that will be in jeopardy will be the senior day streak, which that one almost feels like, I mean, Arizona is a really good team. You're playing at home. I don't know. We'll see how that one goes for KU. And then the other streak that you're talking about possibly not getting is the seasons of winning 20 or more games, which I think that goes back to the 88-89 season when they missed the tournament. Obviously, they were ineligible that year. I want to say they won 19 games that year, and that was when you were playing less games, I believe. So that one would break here if you're Kansas. The other streak that could be interesting, I think it's going to be okay Saturday, but like I do have is it going to be a sellout? I don't know. I mean, the cum rating of this team is so far down, and it's not like, I've had plenty of conversations with KU fans over the weeks about, some of the KU basketball teams that, because it's weird. You still look at it, and they were a 4 seed in that NCAA tournament reveal. And obviously with the result of Saturday and tonight, maybe now they're more of like a 6 seed, who knows, maybe even a 7 seed. But you could still go back into, some of the later Roy Williams days at Kansas. Like you look at the 1999-2000 season, they got an 8 seed. You look at that 98-99 season, they got a 6 seed. And so you think about it from that vantage point, and you're like, well, is this really as bad as those? I think it's worse. One, because you're tanking in the wrong direction as the season goes on. But like you think about that 99-2000 season, if you're Kansas, when you do get an 8 seed, I mean, that team still went 24-10. It's just that you just had a bunch of freshmen on the team. Like you have freshman Nick Collison, freshman Drew Gooden, to where it was like, okay, at the very least, even this team's an 8 seed, they're building to something. They end up getting a 4 seed the next year, make back-to-back Final Fours. The rest is history, right? That's not the case with this team. It's the most experienced team in the country. You're not building to something. This is what you were supposed to be built to. And it has all come crumbling down. What is the highest level of earthquake? It's not an F scale. 7? Something, I don't know, whatever. That's what it is for Kansas. So, yeah, not a fun one. Kansas, bad tonight against BYU, and might just be bad the rest of the way. All right, we'll see you later this week. We are going to talk, because I think it's interesting, especially now, what KU players do you want to come back on the roster and build around Darren Peterson? Because even though there is a big stink on this team, I do think there's some players that you'd like to have back to build around the roster. Bill Self has done better with players returning in the program. So we'll get to that on Thursday's episode, and then on Friday we'll have a KU Oklahoma State preview, and you can catch all that right here anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page with Locked On Jayhawks.